pleasure for me, really an honor, to be called upon to review this book, The Politics of Biafra and the Future of Nigeria, by the one and only Honorable Chudi Offodile. If you want to hear from me, the summary of the review that I'm going to make is to simply say, read this book. If you haven't read it, you haven't read any book on Nigeria, on Biafra, and the road ahead in recent times. I picked a copy a few days ago, and quite honestly, I couldn't stop. I couldn't drop it for 1 minute until I finished. And I bet you that when you pick it, when you pick your own copies today, and you start, you will never stop until you finish. And quite after reading that, I quickly called him and booked for at least 50 copies on reserve, because I understand that the copies are very few and will soon go out. What I would do in this book review, because we don't have time, actually after I read that last night, I was writing notes, and I've written more than 15 pages or so, but I would just read Makandiota, the first 1.5 pages. Then I will go on just to raise some of the themes or takeaways which I think should inform much of our discussions and so on. If you want me to go through the entire content, I won't. Just read the book. So, by way of introduction, I said that this book, for me, this is the book of the year on the future of Nigeria. And anyone interested in the survival of Nigeria has to read this book urgently. Honorable Chudi Offodile has done much of the research and thinking for us and provides useful markers on the road ahead. The literary style is gripping with pleasant storytelling, infused with strong analytical and empirical content that relies on historical records, while not shy to push his personal conclusions. Laced with humor, you read a whole bit of it. It's quite interesting. I remember him talking about Chimamanda Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sun, and remarking for Nwatakịrị na-afụrụ agha ide ụdịva. He wrote that in Igbo. I don't know, Chudi himself was a baby during the war, so we might also say, if we're on if Nwatakịrị na-afụrụ agha dekunu biko. Laced it with a lot of humor, as well as his family and personal experiences and anecdotes. Offodile takes you through a long but refreshing journey that at every turn challenges you to stop and think. He brings fresh perspectives, and its carefully choreographed thematic arrangement and focus easily pass the book as an excellent piece of research work. Following in his jokes and so on, but his goal, even in spite of all of this, seems very clear: to clarify and challenge several of the mainstream narratives surrounding the identity and fate of the Igbos in Nigeria, the struggle for Biafra, its impacts on politics and development in Igbo land, Nigeria's largely futile attempt at forging, quote, forging a nation in a furnace, end of quote, through its inequitable but dysfunctional unitary federal structure and the unfinished business in terms of the lingering national question for Nigeria. Offodile argues forcefully that sustainable development will continue to elude Nigeria unless and until it confronts and addresses what he calls the Biafran dilemma, unquote. Since, quote, it is impossible to hold an unwilling people hostage in any country without negative consequences, end of quote. Biafra in this context is both a specific geographical aspiration and as well as a metaphor for getting Nigeria to work. And coming at a time when many analysts argue that Nigeria has never been more divided, and some even question its long-term survival as a country, while a cacophony of persistent voices insist on the restructuring of Nigeria, this book is timely and provides a powerful insight on the road to take. For anyone interested in understanding the idea and metaphor of Neo-Biafranism, or the historical event of its first advent, aftermaths, and the new resurgence, as well as the road that Nigeria must take to save its fragile state, this book is a must-read. Once you start reading, as I said before, you won't drop it until the last page. For researchers, intellectuals, and students of history, politics, and political science, Offodile's book opens many of the existing books on Biafra and Nigeria. It is pungent and audacious. I want to say audacity is really a thing that grips you through the book. As an elder said when he was being confronted about Biafra and all this quest and the agitation for Biafra, his response was, so it seems that it is actually those who didn't actually experience it firsthand and who are the children of the, if you like, either during or after the war, that exhibit the audacity in discussing Biafra. And I will tell you that the book raises many points of debate, some of which will never be settled. The book is organized in 7 parts with 20 short chapters reflecting the major themes and messages in 279 pages, and of course published by Safari Books, Ibadan. I was happy personally to authorize the publication of my articles in This Day in 2012 as the appendix on that. And as I said, this book simply said, I won't go through all the other pages. I just wanted to read this particular first part of my intervention as it is, just like I said, for the avoidance of doubt. But I call this book the book of counter-narratives. If you read this book from the beginning, like I said, 17 parts, or 7 parts and 20 short chapters. Chapter 1, the preview, where he takes you through a tour de force and also provides forcefully the counter-narrative on Biafra and all kinds of things, what caused the war, how it was done, and everything he challenges. Chapter 2, the Igbo identity crisis. Who are the Igbos? Where are they? Who calls themselves Igbo? In the new Biafra, where would the boundary be? And so on and so forth. The 15th January 1966 coup, what caused it, who organized it, and so on and so forth. The 29th July counter coup, who did, why, and so on. He challenges all the mainstream narratives on all of this. Chapter 5, part 2, period of hostilities. On Aburi we stand. For Chudi, if Nigeria had kept the contents of the agreement at Aburi, the Biafran Civil War would not have happened, and so on and so forth. So you find all these counter-narratives all over. The Biafra intelligentsia, those who drove the war, and his thesis later on that even the current agitation, that without an organized group of intelligentsia to actually drive it, it may not happen. Then the Biafra's non-Igbo actors, Biafra and Britain and the horrors of war. He identifies all the non-Igbos who actually supported Wole Soyinka and the others, even our minority ethnic groups and so on and so forth. Britain and the horrors of war. Why Britain didn't support Biafra and why it actually gave arms to Nigeria. And even some people who had to bond themselves and agitations and the protests, the one of Kanu and so on and so forth, the long letter to renounce all the British honors he had, and so on and so forth. Part 3, the Igbo political trajectory, Nnamdi Azikiwe, the rupture of the views between Zik and Ojukwu, mainstream thoughts in Igbo land, and where they parted were differed ideologically, and even the issue of strategy and tactics about whether to negotiate within the context of pan-Nigeria, negotiate peace, or that Biafra, sovereign Biafra, was not negotiable, and so on and so forth, and that how that rupture within Igbo land and between Ojukwu and Zik actually permeated the politics of Igbo land even after the Civil War, and probably still persisting much of today. And even today, much later, you'll say that the thesis about what is emerging as a new Biafranism, the agitation for Biafra, compared with the alternative, and which is the neo-Zikism, still negotiating a fairer federal Nigeria, and the position of Igbos within that. You will see the letters between, very interesting I found, don't know where he got the archives, the letters exchanged between Azikiwe and Sir Louis Odumegwu, and so on and so forth. The letters by Zik, and so on, very, very interesting. And then you get the Achebe's take on Zik and the Igbo intellectuals who never forgave him for quote-unquote abandoning them during the war. Chapter 12, the Asika years. Interestingly, he points out the Asika years, whatever anybody will think according to him, was actually the golden era in the southeast. Then he deals with the years of decline, from 76 to 98, then Dr. Kweme's bid for power, the betrayal of PDP with the original principles, and that was the last bid, a major bid by an Igbo man for the presidency of Nigeria. And of course, he blames His Excellency that he should have founded his own political party, and that if he had his own party and was a presidential candidate in '99, the outcome of that election, the dynamics of power would have been different. The years of decline again, 99 to 2015. Then he talks about, the failure of leadership. These years of decline and the failure of leadership in Igbo land. That's the gripping story that he concludes with. In other words, the agitation for Biafra, yes, partly because of the marginalization on the part of the larger Nigeria, but even more fundamentally, also that as we point one finger forward, there are the other fingers pointing back at us, and that there is palpable failure of leadership in Igbo land. On part 5, he takes on Biafra from surrender to rebirth. Masob, IPOB, Belia. Actually, he traces the origin of the recent resurgence of the agitation for Biafra to what happened to His Excellency Dr. Kweme at the Just Convention of the PDP, and the feeling of injustice to a group. And that may have, according to him, ignited this, because that the agitation, the new Biafra movement, started in 1999, and not after this election as being falsely put up by some. He takes on the Masob, the IPOB, Belia initiative, and so on and so forth. And the fact that actually there are, within this new movement of the new Biafranism, there is a division between those who want the democratic process, going through the legal process, and that you now have people, Dr. Dozie Ikedife, OON, and retired Justice Ezo Zobo, CON or whatever, of Nigeria. They are now in court. They have sued the federal government of Nigeria at the Federal High Court in Owerri, actually agitating that Biafra should let my people go, as it were. So there is a division in the new Biafranism between the Kanu, Nnamdi Kanu's group, and the Dozie Ikedife and the other elders, that they have actually set up a customary government, as it were, on how to pursue this. So As they put it, then you go to part 6 on the future of Nigeria. Then he talks about Biafra and Nigeria, the war philosophy about to keep Nigeria is a task one as task must be done, and Nigeria not being negotiable. Of course, he argues forcefully that the map of Nigeria in 1999 is no longer the same map today because Bakassi has been exercised from Nigeria, and therefore that the thesis that the thing cannot be negotiated is already a falsehood. It's already been reconstructed and renegotiated, and that Biafra can also be renegotiated. And that particular point of view is false in its entirety. Then 19, Sardauna was a federalist, and that under a true federal structure, Sardauna of Sokoto as the leader of NPC preferred to be in Kaduna, in charge of the regional government, than going to be prime minister of Nigeria, because being premier of northern region was where the power was, rather than going to the, but that we have turned everything upside down. His conclusions are very powerful. Of course, part 7 ends with my piece on the where Nigeria goes from here in terms of what I call reconstructing Nigeria for prosperity. The 3-piece articles that I wrote in this there. Let me just end by taking just 3 quick conclusions, because like I said, I have about 12 pages here, but I can't go through them for want of time. Then we'll need a lot of time to do this. But let me just, for some teasers, point out that reading through this book, one comes through a few themes. The broader and summarizing counter narrative of Honorable Offodile is that, and also supported by what Abakoba San had said at some point, a thesis that if you have a truly federal, fairer, restructured Federal Republic of Nigeria, that the agitation for Biafra might win. That is the counter narrative. But he also argues forcefully about the absence of leadership in Igbo land to push for this counter narrative. Today he talks about the leadership failures, and he took on very forcefully some of our sons who, at least in the last government, he accused of taking the slots belonging to the Igbos. And what they achieved with it was basically to turn rebellions to develop their own villages and abandon the entire Igbo land, as it were. And so this vacuum, according to him, that there is nobody, there is no leadership that actually agitates for the larger Igbos within the same, agitating for this fairer, neo-Nigerian, whatever, what I might call the Neo-Zikism. In other words, within the context of that, Neo-Zikism will represent what Azikiwe lived and canvassed for. They negotiated for a new constitution, for constitutions of Nigeria. They went through a series of constitutional conferences, and Zik died a federalist. So in Igbo land, there could be 2 contending views: the Neo-Zikism, a fairer federal Nigeria, versus the Neo-Biafranism. People who are impatient, who think this thing cannot be fixed. You can't fix Nigeria. It's beyond repair. Just let my people go. There's no question. And even within that, there are differences about the strategy to go through that. But let me point out that in terms of the rupture that took place between Zik and Ojukwu, it seems to me that if the 2 men were alive today, that they will probably align more with the federal, reformed, federalist Nigeria. And why I say that is that Ojukwu, this is an interpretation. My interpretation is that Ojukwu died a federalist. That's my thesis. And why I reach that is that while all through the war, as Chudi points out, until the Addis Ababa Conference of 1969, he was for negotiation. He was for Igbos going back. Aburi was broken. He was struggling to get it to work until he saw that there was no way, and then he said Biafra was then non-negotiable. But after the war, when he came back, he joined NPN and urged Igbos to go back to be reintegrated into Nigeria. That even in 90, when political parties were being set up, he formed his own political party. It wasn't registered, according to this book, but he later joined APUGA and became its national leader. And APUGA is a national party which, among other things, agitates for true federalism. And he contested as a presidential candidate of APUGA, seeking to be president of Nigeria. So in all its ramifications, when you put all together, joining a national party, just like most of the Igbos agitating against the marginalization of the Igbos, that if Ojukwu were alive, that there could have been back again, the rupture probably would have mended back into a mono view, into a federal, fairer Nigeria. That is a question mark. But there seems to be quite two views. The Neo-Zikism for pan-Nigerian federalists versus Neo-Biafranism to go into a sovereign state of Biafra. A second theme that I pick is that Nigeria, everybody talks about restructuring. From this book, we get an unambiguous view of the faulty design of the Nigerian system. There was a modification of the Agui-Ironsi's unitary system into a unitary federal structure with a suffocating command post at Abuja. That suffocating command structure of unitary federalism was okay for sharing and consuming the oil rent. But now that things are falling apart, but that system also, even while the oil rent lasted, was inherently politically unstable and unproductive economically. If you see the failed or fragile state indices and the rankings of Nigeria, we have been coming back precipitously from number 54 in 2005, now to number 13. We are one of the countries under the red alert list. And so it hasn't worked. The concoction hasn't worked. The 36 state structure that we have today, Offodile argues very forcefully that this current 36 structure is contrary to the instruments of surrender of Biafra. That there are three conditions that they agreed on the instruments of surrender. One of which was that the Biafrans accepted, said, we accept the current structure, which then was a 12-state structure. And that B or C of it was that any future change must bring all Nigerians on the table to agree. And that these were the things they signed at the instrument of surrender, but that the military unilaterally subsequently changed the structure without then the participation of the other side. And he argues that this is against the instrument of the surrender, and that no wonder the Southeast has been marginalized out of it, 5 states out of the others having 6 and 7, as the case may be. Now there is the issue of unitary fiscal federalism instead of the 1963 Republican Constitution on fiscal federalism. There is the expansive exclusive list and having overpowerful Abuja. The development process is a trickle down from Abuja to the rest instead of a bottom-up economic and development arrangement. The census and revenue allocation that disadvantages the Southeast. There is the citizenship question. The Igbos think they become visitors everywhere all over the country. When it is time for census, the Southeast complain that they are about the only ethnic group that have maybe a majority of their people living outside of their homeland. And that during census, their populations are counted in the states where they live. Imagine a state, and then population becomes basis for sharing the oil money in Abuja. When it is time for that, you count them in there. You don't ask for state of origin in the census. But then, you use also the population to get the allocations. But when it is time to share anything else, you remind them that they don't belong here, as the case may be. So there have been issues about citizenship question, and so on and so forth. So, in other words, this system, it's not just the Southeast or the Igbos that complain. It has not worked for Nigeria. And my thesis is that even if any government, including this one, just have all the political appointments from the one village, my thesis is that the life of the average person in that village will not change. Just rewind it again, and think the other way. The last regime, we had an Ebele Azikiwe as president. We had secretary to government. We had minister of finance and coordinating minister on the economy. We had all of this, deputy senate president, this, that, and so on and so forth. Most of the financial institutions headed by people from the Southeast. And yet, there is no motorable federal highway in Igbo land. This thing is an elite game as far as I'm concerned. The issue of who and whatever and so on and so forth is not taking us anywhere. And unless we get to the heart of it. So, it seems that there is a consensus today. There is a consensus. If you take it much broadly, the North, so-called North, if you calculate the number of years they were in power, but essentially, poverty is still predominantly a northern phenomenon. So, that you control this and a few billionaires are made here and there and so on and so forth means absolute nothing. The ordinary man in Nigeria has not benefited, is getting worse off by the current system that we have. But there is a consensus now on restructuring. And in that case, Offodile would argue that Biafra becomes a metaphor for agitation by oppressed people for justice, equity, and fairness. It hasn't worked for anybody. If you look at President Buhari recently said he also supports amendment of the Constitution or devolution. If you read the APC manifesto, it says, quote, as a change agent, APC intends to cleanse our closet to halt the dangerous drift of Nigeria to a failed state, with a conscious plan for post-oil economy in Nigeria. To achieve this laudable program, APC government shall restructure the country, devolve power to the units with the best practices of federalism, and eliminate unintended paralysis of the center. End of quote. This is the government in power that controls 23 states. This is the APC manifesto. So, and the Southern People's Assembly talk about the same thing. The Afenifere's position on the National Conference, if you read it, talks about the same thing. The National Conference report talks, supported by PDP, the same thing. So what is holding us? I must say the goal of this bit should be political stability and economic prosperity. In my view, a competitive federalism. We can write a book on this aspect of competitive federalism. Compared to the First Republic, when everybody had theirs, they had the resources, especially on revenue, a fiscal federalism. We've argued before, leave everybody their own thing. Let them pay taxes to the center. This umbilical cord where Abuja will set wage for everybody all over the country, and so on and so forth. It was for a time when oil money paid for it, not anymore. Even in the US, you may have read about the governor of Maine, that the wife of the governor had to take a job in a restaurant to augment their income. Because given the state of Maine, the salary of the governor was not enough for them to survive on. And the wife had to take a job in a restaurant. The governor of Maine's salary cannot be the same as the mayor of New York, and so on and so forth. But here we've done all of this. Abuja controls it. Anyway, that's for another day. But what is holding us now, what I call as matter arising, is that the devil is in the details. Let the debate begin. What exactly do we mean by restructuring? The National Conference report, for example, is a beginning, but in my view, doesn't go much. It talks about creating more states, which misses the point. It's still more of the same. We are saying the ones that you have are not viable. 20-something states today cannot pay salaries. So what are we talking about? Or should we go back to the EQMS constitution, the proposal of 6 zonal structure as the federating units? What model of federation? Should we use the UAE, United Arab Emirates system, or which one are we going? Let us get to work and begin to think. Some people propose, and I agree, that we need a new constitution negotiated by the people of Nigeria. And my thesis is that if this is the only achievement of President Buhari, he would be greatest statesman ever in the mold of Abraham Lincoln. But we need to get this done. That the people of Nigeria will have to get together and negotiate a new constitution for themselves. Second, or the third point, is leadership failure in Igbo land. It raises fundamental questions if you read Chudi's book on the collapse of failure of leadership in Igbo land and the search for the new one, whatever. It's in that light it agitates your mind when we talk about Igbo presidency. What does that actually mean? Is it to have somebody wearing a red cap in the villa, or what? If all that we say, even within the states, a governor is first his village, his local government, then his senatorial zone, so that he can be Ochelozwa of his own local government or his village, and so on and so forth. Then let the others care. Is that the kind of leadership we are talking about Nigeria, or in the new Biafra, as it were? And we have seen it, like I said, about people occupying offices and so on and so forth, and still nothing. So the question is, the same contradictions in Nigeria also there within Igbo land. We cry of marginalization at the larger Nigeria, but there is also cries of marginalization within. There is the identity question within. There is the citizenship and indigenship question within. How many other Igbos live in Aba and in Abia, for example? But, I don't know, 2 years or 3 years ago, that was the indigenship thing, that all non-Abia citizens were sacked from but these people had lived there, worked there, paid their taxes there. They were counted as part of Abia in the census. You collect revenue, more revenue because of them. But then, no, you can't work in there. You are not an indigent. So while we are pointing one finger there, ladies and gentlemen, look closely. The other three are saying, let's get it here. And so how can this new leadership emerge? And then of course the entry fee is very high. The fourth, the new Biafranism, and that is my last point. And let me say that Nigeria has wittingly or unwittingly dragged the Biafran issue from the periphery into the mainstream discussion. Nnamdi Kanu, in my view, threw a bait and Nigeria took it. Today, he is the most popular political prisoner and will end up either as a hero or a martyr. But to his credit, he has forced Nigeria and the world to discuss Biafra. I believe that keeping him there does not do Nigeria any good. I believe this young man should be released, and released like yesterday. I will not be surprised if he becomes a subject of the next political campaigns. Just like we dealt with Awolowo, who was convicted and imprisoned of treason, or Gowon, charged with treason, or even Ojukwu himself was forgiven, and so on and so forth. I don't want to make any predictions, but I believe we need to solve this. Because according to Offodile, this book, quote, he said, the lesson to be learned, if anyone cares to listen, is that the detention of Nnamdi Kanu, no matter for how long, will not stop the agitation of Biafra, end of quote. He further argues that the detention of Uwazurike between 2005 to 2007 helped to radicalize his followers. The same thing happened when the leader of Boko Haram was killed. His followers became more radicalized. Detention of Nnamdi Kanu, I never heard of him before this time, to be quite honest. Never heard of him. I didn't even know about the IPOB or whatever thing. Until this thing, and you now realize globally it's become an issue and it's become mainstream. Now, and again, quote, he says, this book argues that the idea of a customary government under the Supreme Council of Elders in accordance with customary law enjoys the support among a section of the Igbo, but it is the Biafra or death philosophy of Nnamdi Kanu that found resonance across the length and breadth of the Igbo nation. Therefore, there cannot be a resolution of the Biafran dilemma without a wholesome engagement of the Nnamdi Kanu Uche Mefo faction of IPOB. End of quote. That's what this was. So, if I were President Buhari, quite honestly, I would be very suspicious of anyone who advises me to ignore the Biafran issue. I'll be very suspicious. Anybody who says that is either ignorant or being mischievous, or quite patently doesn't mean well for the government itself. Probably wants the same government to repeat the mistakes of the past so that we could lead it down the train. We must start learning in this country. So let's talk Biafra. Where are the Igbo elite and intelligentsia in all of this? Especially those in Nigeria. It seems, as this book points out, this is being driven mostly by the Igbo intelligentsia in diaspora, the new resurgence. The new ones within, there seems to be a division, 3 classes you can identify. The ones within the mainland, and I'm shocked, and you discuss, they have a different point of view. Those in diaspora within Nigeria, so to speak, who are in Abuja and Lagos and so on and so forth, Kanu, Kaduna, and so on. And an elder was asked about that, living in one of these northern states, about Biafra. And they asked him, what do you think about this Biafra? He said, well, I just didn't know. In other words, they should keep it up, but you know I can no longer go now. You see all the things I have here, I cannot carry them on my head. So, there seems to be a sense of either denial, and on one part, or people who think, no, it won't be, because we can't just imagine it. And because of some discussion that, oh, okay, if this happens, you will lose your property, you will lose that, and so on. Of course, that is untenable. I mean, I too was wrong on this, because if by any chance you have another state of Biafra, it will be the 16th state of ECOWAS. And that means you have free movement of goods and persons. But the fundamental question, the fundamental issue is that this debate is not happening. This whole thing is being driven almost in a haphazard manner. Last week, they called for, was that last week? Yeah, last week. They called for a sit at home. And even without anybody getting out to more in force and so on, I learned virtually Anambra and many other cities were completely shut down. It just tells you there is something going on. But again, where is the elite in this? What is missing is structured debate and apparent elite aloofness or complicity or hypocrisy. Elite in denial. For the politicians who think you can just, let's use them temporarily, let's use them. Just go on, while we can then use that to negotiate for something here. I can tell you, you will create a monster that will consume you. When that inferno comes, both us, everybody else, and the kind of thing that happened in Biafra where dissent, any dissent was considered a saboteur. Okay? You might get to a point where you will be telling them, just go on, while we can negotiate here, get something for ourselves in Abuja. I can tell you, these guys are no fools. At some point, they will look at you too and know that you're actually part of the problem. And so on and so forth. So, I say, let the debate must begin. The late Dr. Pius Okibo, in this book as well, presented what the memo by late Dr. Pius Okibo presented to the Biafran government on the economic viability of Biafra. Nobody is talking about what the currency will look like. How will you fare with international trade? What kind of constitution are you talking about? And Offodile forcefully argues here that the Ahira Declaration of 1969 came too late. They had intelligentsia pushing for Biafra, but there was no organized structure. That if they had done what they did towards the end of the war at the beginning, Biafra would not have ended the way that it did. But what is shocking is people talk about this in their bedrooms and in their parlors, and then you come out and everybody is just, and so on. I'm sure it will not take long. So what I am calling is that we must, the elite, the intelligentsia, get out of the closet and let us, now that the issue, the president in New York made a point. He said there will be no referendum in Biafra. Now, and I said, my reaction to it was, oh my God. So this matter has actually gotten to the point where we are now talking whether to have referendum or not to have referendum. The moment you've reached that point, it tells you that it's only a matter of time. But who is driving the debate? The Neo-Zikism, Neo-Biafranism, and so on and so forth. Everybody seems to be quite quiet. And finally, let me agree with Wole Soyinka that Biafra is an idea. And that is what this book talks about. You can't defeat it with guns or prison cells. The only way to defeat it is to offer a counter-narrative. What should, there has been none, no counter-narrative until now. What Honorable Offodile has done is to provide very powerful, not only counter-narrative, but counter-narratives. And I will say, and stresses the urgency of action now. The clock is ticking. And I can only end by congratulating Chudi for this eminent work. Thank you very much.